Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second in our webinar series that looks at the future of the desktop and desktop container technology. Today, I'm joined by two of my ScotLogic colleagues, Technical Principal Mark Jose and ScotLogic CTO Colin Eberhardt. Mark and Colin will both be sticking around for the Q&A at the end. So if you have a question for either of them, pop it into the question box and we'll take as many as we can at the end. And if you'd like a copy of today's slides, you can download these in the handout section. I also wanted to let you know how you can configure your screen, just in case this is your first time using the GoToWebinar platform. So there are two small lines between the webcam and the slide deck, and you can slide these up and down to make either of the screens bigger or smaller. This will be especially useful in today's webinar, where Mark will be showing you some real code. If you maximize your screen this way and you're still struggling to read the code, do let me know in the chat box and I will interrupt Mark and ask him if he can enlarge the font. Now, I embarrassed Colin enough with his intro in the first webinar, so today it's Mark's turn. So let me tell you a bit about our second speaker. Mark Jose is a technical principal with more than 20 years of software development experience. He's developed software in most languages and is a consultant, developer, and architect. He's developed and architected solutions in the investment banking, energy trading, and gaming sectors, including a number of trading platforms. He has a comprehensive knowledge of desktop containers, having sat on the FDC3 working group and been an active contributor to FinOS. When he's not writing software, he can mostly be found under the bonnet of a car, trying to figure out how he broke it. So let me pass you over to today's speakers, and over to you first, Colin.
Well, thanks for sparing my blushes and not embarrassing me this time. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the overall topic that we're covering in this webinar series. So the title of the white paper that accompanies this is Building an Integrated Desktop Application Ecosystem for Finance. So what we're looking at is the tools and technologies that allow you to create a much more rich and usable desktop experience within enterprises, typically within the financial services sector. This is a sector where people have numerous internal tools that are quite critical to their business processes, and we're looking to a future where it's much easier for the business to deploy and integrate both their own application and third-party applications as well, and a future where the users can more seamlessly integrate these tools in support of bespoke user-oriented workflows. And we all know that there's a significant technology challenge standing in the way of this future vision, and we're looking at the steps that you can take to ultimately be free from the constraints of legacy, where both the old world and the new world live side by side. So I'll be passing over to Mark. There's some information on the slides here. If you want to see the previous webinar or download the web paper, there's a couple of links there. But I'll pass over to Mark, who's going to start elaborating on the story that I told in the last webinar by showing some practical examples and how you can use OpenFin in this case to take your first steps towards this future vision. So I'm going to pass over to Mark.
Cool. Thank you very much, Colin. I'll move on. I guess Colin said a lot about legacy and the whole theme of desktop agents and containers. There's lots of moving parts. There's lots of terminology. I guess I really wanted to illustrate that in this slide that's on the screen now. All of the bits are here, and I really want to sort of identify what I'm hoping to talk about today. So I guess we've got at the top there, we've got web applications. We've got, they can be run in a browser on the left there. We've got the stuff that we're generally going to talk about in a container, which is, I guess, that column down the middle. And then we've got legacy applications, which are your existing applications. And a lot of demos that I've seen of OpenFin and other containers, Electron, for example, tend to focus on how you can build something and put it in a container and see it on the screen. And actually, a lot of the applications, like I say, are legacy applications, are decades old within a lot of organizations that we work with. And actually, what you don't want to do is just throw a lot away and build something new. In a lot of cases, you need some middle ground. So I guess I've color coded this a little bit. It's a big diagram. I guess what I really wanted to say was the stuff that's yellow, we'll accept that it exists, and I might talk about it, but I'm not going to explain what it is. The stuff that's red, I'm not going to talk about. And the stuff that's in the sort of the blue color is going to be the focus of the new, if you like, and the stuff that's in the orange color is going to be the focus of the old. And I am going to talk about those. So I guess building or migrating with OpenFin. OpenFin supplies the bits that I've highlighted in the OpenFin blue, I guess. What I really want to show is I want to walk through the story or the steps to actually taking a legacy app and putting it into OpenFin piece by piece. It's going to be hard to do that without giving some background on how OpenFin works. So I would like to start with a bit of an introduction to how OpenFin works. However, I'm not going to focus on this. And the things I'm specifically going to cover today are the JavaScript API in OpenFin, the channels API, the inter-application bus, which is key to this, I guess. I'm going to talk a little bit about FDC3, about find out what that is later, I guess, if you don't already know what it is. And then tools that OpenFin provide that you can put into your legacy applications to let them communicate with your new applications, specifically the .NET adapter. And I was going to go back to WPF in terms of legacy, but I thought let's go legacy and let's go to WinForms. So I'm going to talk a little bit about WinForms. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a blast from the past, I know. So I guess the easiest thing to build is a simple web application these days. For my examples, I'm going to use my preferred set of tools. So if nobody's looked at these, I will be using them. I'm happy for questions about them at the end, but I just want to accept that this is my setup. Other setups are available, and every developer will want to use their own tools, I guess. So I'll be using Chrome DevTools quite heavily in the Chrome browser, and also through OpenFin. I'll show you how that works. VS Code I'll be using. I'm going to caveat that with, I'm going to use Visual Studio a little bit as well, just for some of the dialogues that we're doing. For WinForms dialogues, because it's just easier to show something graphical. However, I would normally use VS Code for that as well. I'm going to use a thing called the Live Server, which is a VS Code extension. I'm going to use a lot of Node.js, so JavaScript on the desktop, and I'm going to use Git Bash, so I'm going to do get stuff from the command line. There's not going to be much of that. It's not going to be too technical. So I've mentioned, I guess, the simplest thing to build here is an HTML5 application, as a single-page application, and launch that in a web-based container. So what is a single-page application? Let me really quickly now flip. So one thing that Slides doesn't do very well is flip between browser windows, which I'm going to be doing a lot of when the browser window is full screen. So rather than lose my presentation, I'm just going to present in non-full screen. I'm going to quickly flip to VS Code, and in here I have essentially what you'll all recognize as an HTML file. So this, I guess, is a single-page application in its simplest form. It's a single page loaded from a server or locally from a file link, which includes some inline JavaScript. And this application is pretty straightforward. If I scroll down to the bottom here, lines 40 to 45, you can see it creates a couple of handles to a couple of elements on the page, a button called Press Me, and a pre-tag called Info. And when you click on the Press Me button, it will call a function called onButtonClicked. That onButtonClicked will actually check to see if we're running in OpenFin, which we're not going to be to start with. And because we're not, an application doesn't exist, it's going to set the inner text on the pre to know when OpenFin application was found. And actually, I guess I want to focus a little bit on web development here. Web development is accessible and easy because I can literally write this code in here. It's 49 lines in one file. I'm going to caveat that with I do pull it in style sheet, but let's skirt over that and ignore that I did that. I can right click on this and do Open with Live Server, which is that extension I mentioned. And I've now got, let me pull this out of my presentation window, make it a bit smaller. I've now got essentially a browser running an application in the browser. And that's a single page application. I can interact with that application and it's not going to go off to a server and get anything else. It's already got everything it needs. It's not running in a container. I can do press for info. and it says no OpenFin application was found, which is what we expected. So that's great. We all knew you could do that. People have been doing it for years. How do we spin that up in an OpenFin container? So OpenFin has a number of tools. I am quickly going to flick back to my presentation window. So OpenFin gives you a command line interface. You can install that globally. I'm not going to do that now. I've done that before the demo because you don't want to sit and wait for NPM. And you can actually launch OpenFin from a URL, which I'm going to do now, or a manifest, and I'll cover that in a little bit. So very, very simply, I can grab, let me go back, juggling some windows here, sorry about that. So in here, I can actually go into my single page application folder, and in here I can do OpenFin .launch, the shortcut for that is L.u for the URL, and I can give it the URL where it's running in my window. Let's find my window, and we grab the URL out of here, and I will paste the URL in there. So I'm going to launch OpenFin. That's doing a bunch of things. It's written a temporary manifest, and I'll get into what a manifest is in a second. But that's gone off and it'll be grabbing some assets, and it will then spin up window. Let me find out which screen it's launched it on. There we are. Beauty of non-cached. So I now have the same application, and that's now running in an OpenFin container. The beauty of this is a web application running in the container, and I've got the same things available. So I've got the same tools available I would in the browser. So I can right-click and I can inspect, and that will give me some dev tools, which are exactly the same dev tools you get in Chrome. I'm not going to cover them now. All web developers will have used them at some point. But if I press for info in here, what you'll see I get lots of information about the application, because I can now actually find an application and draw on some of the settings out of that. So very, very quickly, just to run over that code, gets the application, gets the current application synchronously off the application object. It creates a couple of promises, one to get info about the application and one to get the application manifest. And again, I'm going to cover manifest in a second. And then once it's done that, it sets the text to the manifest, which is exactly what we saw. So what happened there? What did it do? Let me quickly show you what it did. If I can get back to my browser window, there we are. There's a thing installed on my machine, which was installed the first time I ran the OpenFin CLI, or it can be installed from an installer. Actually, if you build an installer, called the OpenFin RVM or the Runtime Version Manager. And this is essentially a coordinator. It coordinates which versions of the runtime, of the OpenFin runtime, are installed on your machine, and which versions of the app are cached on your machine. You can supply that Runtime Version Manager with a URL, and it will figure out a temporary manifest for you, and that will pick the latest version of the runtime, and the URL is the URL of the app that you've created. And it'll put them together and launch them in a window, and you've just seen that in action. But what you can actually do is you can create a manifest, and that manifest will allow you to pick which version of the runtime you want to run and which application you want to run, and it'll allow you to set all sorts of other settings. So the RVM handles all that for you, and that's exactly what it did. And if you don't have the runtime that you've asked for, it'll actually go off and get the runtime. So actually, the deployment of the runtimes is handled for you, I guess. Let me quickly show you a manifest. So a manifest looks a little bit like this. This is a very, very simple manifest. In the startup app, there are a number of options. I'm not going to go through what they are. There's loads of documentation on the OpenFin website as to what all of the options are. But in its simplest form, it gives my application a name. It points at the URL, and I'm hosting this application locally using live server. This could be a URL on the internet. It could be pointed to a local file, so if you bundled and distributed an application, for example. And then you have to give your application a UID. I've put some text in here. You might want to generate GUIDs or some other way of giving your app a unique ID to run as on the desktop. I'm going to say save window state false. That means that the window will always appear in the default location. It won't appear where I last closed it down, and auto show true, which means it will always show a default window for the application. So very, very quickly, if I just cancel this and I do exactly the same command as I did before, if I do C this time, which is part of the configuration, and say Simple. JSON. That'll use this manifest and go off and launch the same application. It has on a different window, on a different screen, but there you go, the same application. Cool, so that's all well and good. Not many people write applications like this. So I'm going to really quickly cover what most people would like to do generally is use a framework. You'll all have heard of React, you'll all have heard of Angular. I'm going to use React for this, actually. What you can do is you can do exactly the same, get the same approach, but in a framework. I quite like React, and so I'll quickly show you some React code that does the same thing. Again, I'm going to flip over this because it's not the focus of this particular webinar. So what I have in here is I have a very simple component called app config. I'm not going to cover how you mount this component or how you render this component. That's a React tutorial, and I'm not doing that. This particular one uses React hooks, which came in 16.8 of React. It uses useEffect and useState. UseEffect handles side effects, and useState handles current component state. And I've done exactly the same thing here as what I did in the index.html file that you saw before. So found an application. If an application exists, then update some state. And if it doesn't exist, set no OpenFin, and you'll see actually set no OpenFin true. And then it's down here, if there's no OpenFin, show this message or nothing, and also output anything, the app config that we were fetching, exactly the same code. So you can see that works in both ways. I guess another thing here is there's a shameless plug coming up, but a while ago, a colleague of mine realized that actually there's a lot of this common stuff in OpenFin wrapped up in hooks is used again and again and again. So there's a bit of a shameless plug here for OpenFin React hooks, which has been released into Finos. It's now open source and accept contributions. So hopefully Dean will be happy that I've plugged that, and you might get some contributors from this code. You never know. Let's move on. I mentioned the manifest. So the manifest has a bunch of options, and these manifests can get quite complex. There's a link on here, and the reason for this slide is actually just to have the link on there. So if you're watching this back, that's where you can find out information about all of the settings that you can put in your startup app to do with window size and everything else. So that's how you get, I guess, a UI running in OpenFin, and that's all well and good if you're building something from scratch and you want to launch it. I guess one of the things that a lot of web developers struggle with, or not struggle with, but there's always a lot of debate about how do you manage state in a web application. And there's a number of options. I'm not going to advocate for any one of these here, but I think it's something worth mentioning. And there's a number of routes. If you're using a browser, some people will use window opener. So when you open a child window, you'll keep a handle to your previous window, and you can share stuff. But you've got to go do all that stuff yourself. You've got to synchronize that. You've got to handle concurrency concerns. Handling state within a window, you can use things like Redux and MobX. And actually, there are a few strategies where they'll sync the store across windows using persisting in local storage. A lot of web applications use server-side state, so bandwidth these days to the internet is very high. Therefore, sometimes using server-side state is the right thing to do. A lot of big companies actually do this. Like if you take for Netflix, for example, if you stop a video on one device and go and view it on another device, that state is being held in the cloud on the internet, and that's an option. But actually, a lot of large financial institutions with legacy applications, they don't want to have to open up routes through their firewall to do things like that, and don't want to touch the internet, and we want to do that on the desktop. And that's, I guess, where the inter-app bus comes in. And there's a few strategies in OpenFin. Headless window, so essentially any OpenFin application can run without a UI, and also custom services. Let's explore them a little bit more. So I guess I've mentioned this is all great for greenfield applications, but where I want to really get to with this webinar is into migrating legacy applications. So how do we take something that's old and do something new, and how do we mitigate the risk in doing that, and how do we do it gradually rather than big bang? I'm going to, I've put up a slide here, legacy desktop technologies. I kind of see these legacy in terms of stuff at the bottom, definitely legacy, stuff at the top, probably not, and stuff in the middle, it's very debatable. In fact, there's lots of debate going on, specifically around WPF. And I do remember Colin, someone asking Colin about if we considered WPF legacy, and Colin came up with a very political answer. I'm going to say I do, and feel free to send questions later, take it offline. I've gone right back to WinForms. However, I'm using Netcore, and the reason I'm using Netcore for my example here is because I can actually use VS Code in the .NET command line, but the principles are the same. So I guess in the simplest form, we've got coexistence. You might want to create a new thing that lives on the desktop next to the legacy thing. That's pretty easy. I'm not even going to demo that. You can see numerous demos on the OpenFin website about how to get launch windows from other applications, stuff like that. I guess the key thing is here, they're two separate applications. They're just living on the same desktop. I guess the integration piece comes, or the actual communication piece comes in when you want one to talk to the other. And I guess the next step from that, next simplest thing in my view, is where you have a legacy application. It's doing some stuff that it's done for years. You know it works, it's robust, and you want to display some output from that in another application, which is a modern web app. Perfect example is you have some symbols or instruments within your legacy application, and you want to show a chart, for example, and you want to use some new all singing, all dancing web charting technology. How do you have someone click on your legacy app, click on a button, and display something in a web app? So I've created a legacy app specifically for this, which I'm going to go into Visual Studio for, and it has it's quite simple. I'm just going to on the right hand side. I don't know if you can read the font on the right hand side. It's not that critical, but what I will tell you in here is there's a DLL which contains some complicated business logic, which you can see on the screen right now. And there's a WinForms application which calls into that DLL to use the business logic in there, and it contains a very simple form. Let me just start that up, and you'll see what that looks like. And I'll keep talking while it does it because it's taking a little while. There we are, right. So this is my WinForms application, and you can see it's got a very, very complex user interface. It calls into that complex business logic. So I can add some numbers together, I can subtract some numbers, I can multiply and divide, and actually that's been handed off to that DLL that we saw. What if I wanted to show the results of those things in a new web app? So I built one of them too, and let me just dive into here. Let me close this down, and in here I have an app called, which I've called Display Legacy Data, and as you can see, it calls on the OpenFin interapp bus, and it subscribes to a bunch of topics or channels for each of the actions. So let me kill off my simple application. Dive into my integration applications, and in the same way as we started the OpenFin application before, I'm going to start up my display legacy data.json. And you'll see I've got a very, very complex app here. So let's grab both apps on the screen at once. So the application on the left is a web app. The application on the right is a legacy WinForms app. And I can click on the buttons here. And as I click the buttons, the result of the output, let's just change the number to prove I'm not actually mocked that up, is being sent down the interapp bus. The web application is subscribed to the interapp bus, and it's displaying that on the screen in a single page application. So simple ways of sharing data across the interapp bus. I guess that's a very simple thing, and it works well if you just want to pass, like I say, a chart out, or have a charting application that shows whatever symbol you want to pass it. I guess the next step from that is pretty much this two-way communication. So let me flip backwards and forwards between my slides. So is this sort of setup here where you have a new application you've built, and that application might be reasonably complex. It has some UI running in the Electron-based web container. it has the interrupt bus, and has a bunch of services as well. So OpenFin supports services. I'm not going to talk too much about those unless there's specific questions. Excuse me. But there's lots of information on the OpenFin website, developer site, about how to set up custom services, how to call into services that they include as part of the OpenFin product. But I want this to communicate both ways. So I have another app. So let's keep our legacy WinPhones app, and let's go back to here and kill this one off. And instead of launching this one, I'm going to launch an application I have here called two-waycoms.json. And let's talk a little bit about what that does. So that's pretty much the same. We still need a handle for the interrupt bus, but this time, whenever you actually change something, and this actually application only has a recreation of the add remove. So let's see what it looks like. It looks a little bit like this. So I've recreated the add functionality, but it has no business logic. It's not doing any business logic here. It's not doing the addition, because we want to use the business logic from the legacy application. That's the bit we know works. We don't have to rewrite that stuff. And actually, in a lot of these decades-old applications that live within large enterprises, sometimes the knowledge has left the business, sometimes it's badly documented, but the business trusts that application, they know it works. And you don't want to change that, at least not right now. So what this literally does, when you click the button, is it will grab the values out of the fields, and it will send them over the interrupt bus to our legacy application. Our legacy application will then take those values, it'll pass them into the logic that we know works, it'll get a result, and it'll send it back to the application, at which point it's subscribed here, and it will write those into the values. So let's bring both things up on the screen at once. So we've got our new application on the left, we've got our legacy application on the right, and what I'd like to do now is if I go and change some values in here, let's put 15 and 10. I'm sure we can add them together. So what it did there was it took the 15 and the 10, it sent them to the legacy application on the right, which then did the calculation, displayed the result, and sent the result back to the new application and populated that. So this is all great, but actually, if we're duplicating this add functionality, we don't want it over here and we don't want it over there. And actually, what you really want is the end goal is to have a modern web application running in OpenFin. And for your older application, you might retain some business logic. You'll probably have retired any functionality you don't really want. But you probably don't want to launch the UI for your older application. The new web application gives you way more flexibility in terms of styling and lots of other things, and just developer experience, to be fair. It's much faster to deliver value in a modern application just because of the community and the tooling that's around it, generally, than it is in some of these legacy techs. So let's close down this application and imagine instead of running that application, we run, I'm going to quickly go back to Visual Studio, we run this other application here. So I can set startup application and fire that off. So this is our other legacy application. And what I'm going to do, hang on a minute, this is always the problem with live stuff. Let me just kill a few of these other applications off that I didn't kill off before. And I will go to, yep, right. So I'm going to kill that off. And I'm going to spin up the two-way comms application we had before. So spin this up. Kill that off. Sorry, my bad. I want to spin this up, sorry, with live server because it needs to be served. That's what I needed to do. And then let me go back to my legacy application and we'll spin this up again. Sorry about this. Had to do something wrong, had to spin up something in the wrong order at some point during this. Here we go. So we now have a legacy application running. let me, excuse me for this. I've got lots of windows on the screen here. I'm juggling, and I am actually opening the wrong one. Let's delete that. Right. Let me start this one up. Sorry. So what I've got here is I've got live server now running my new legacy app, which is what I wanted to show you. And what we can do in the legacy app, sorry, the new app and in the legacy app here, what we've done is on our code form, we have created an OpenFin embedded view. So OpenFin provides an embedded view adapter, which allows you to pull in an embedded application. We initialize that really, really quickly. And then what we do is we point it at our hosted application. Now, this is being hosted locally. It could be hosted anywhere else. But what we're doing is we're going to initialize that application in the container in the legacy app view. So it's very much like when we run our side-by-side containers, but imagine you have some layout on your legacy application and you want them to run side-by-side. You want your new application to run embedded in your old application, then you can do that in this manner. There we are. Cool. So we've got this functionality below, and you can see the add button is duplicated. But actually, this isn't really WinForms. So the first add button, the subtract, the multiply, divide buttons, are all WinForms buttons. The button at the bottom here, this is actually our new modern web app, styled to look like WinForms, running in the legacy app that we have here, and actually it has the same functionality. So I can change this down here and click add, and you can see it's sending again across the app bus between the item at the top and the item at the bottom. The benefit of this is it means I can go away and I can, at this point now, I could probably remove the form controls for the add button at the top and replace it with the form controls, or the application, if you like, the new application that's running at the bottom. Imagine this is something like a more complex app, and you're doing some sort of WinForms or WPF window layout management, where you can drag and drop windows and scroll. You might want to replace or start by replacing one of your items of functionality, one of your windows, one of your tabs, one of your components even, with a new modern web component, and actually have it appear to be native within the app. And you can keep pulling your native legacy app apart in this way till all of your components are essentially micro components. There's a common practice at the moment called micro UIs, or micro front ends people are talking about, and it's the same sort of practice, and Colin alluded to it in his last webinar, as microservices. So you get to a point where literally your WinForms or your WPF application is just a container for lots and lots of small web applications. And at that point, you can then get rid of your container and replace it with something like OpenFin. And then you have all of the power of the OpenFin sort of the platforms API and all of their layout management to do that. Sorry it took so long to actually get this third demo up and running. That's one of the downsides of doing things live and juggling numerous windows about. I guess one other little quick thing that I thought I could show you is the experience of developing these sort of apps, even in legacy apps, gives you all sorts of really cool stuff you can do. Let me just hide the terminal panel. So I've got another style sheet here, so I called it Integrated Plus, and all this does is just add some new styles to my web app. If I save this, because it's running on a live server, see how quick that updated in the legacy app. Now imagine you could develop legacy apps where you could style and theme and push pixels that sort of speed without having to stop the app, recompile, start it back up again, test it. So the buttons are now rounded, and that's the end of my demo. So I guess I just want to wrap some of this stuff up. Let me go back to my slides. So you can build any level of complex applications this way. You can have modern apps using business logic in the older apps. You can have legacy apps sending messages to modern apps. You could have legacy apps, if you really wanted to maintain a legacy app or add new functionality to a legacy app, you could actually have that call into the modern app services. Modern apps and legacy apps, can both call across the inter-app bus into modern desktop services or legacy business logic. And likewise, you can manufacture modern desktop services which call out to web APIs and other APIs to do integrations into third-party stuff. I'm running on here. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm quickly going to just mention FDC3. FDC3 is a working group within Finos, or a standards body within Finos. If you're not familiar with Finos, go to finos.org and have a look. But basically, the mission statement on the screen here is to develop specific protocols and taxonomies to advance the ability of desktop applications in financial workflows and to interoperate in a plug-and-play fashion without prior bilateral agreements. I guess the real aim is that all of these applications that people are writing to come up with a standard language. So the messages I've sent there between the modern app and the older app, I could come up with any sort of message schema I wanted there, but it makes sense that actually at the top level there's a sort of a meta schema or a top level schema around these things, and if everybody buys into that and everybody uses that, then these apps should be able to interop with each other, no matter who the vendor is or who the manufacturer is of the actual application itself. A few quick examples. FDC3 instrument is a standard context for the instrument. I'm going to quickly whiz through. So define some standards, so with some optional parameters. And if everybody buys them, that's great. I'm not going to spend ages on FDC3, but you should probably check that out if you're going to sort of build these systems where you're sending messages over the inter-app bus or any other channel or pub sub mechanism. And then I guess the final thing is to ask for questions and probably hand back to Claire.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. And maybe that's a topic for a future webinar. Who knows? Maybe we should do a joint one with Finos and go into a bit more detail about FDC3. Food for thought. So I just want to point out some details. The next one, these that Mark is doing for us, it's a series of 3. So OpenFin today, obviously. The next one is going to be the same thing, but showing you that on the Glue42 platform. And then the final of the 3 is going to be doing the same thing with Finsomble. So I hope you can join us for the next one. That's on the 22nd of July at 10 o'clock. And there's a link there where you can go to the platform and register for that website, for that webinar. And if you're not available, I will say just register anyway, and you'll receive a link so that you can watch the recording. So you don't have to be available at the live time. So we've got a couple of questions that have already come in. We do have more time, so do get your questions in for either Mark or Colin. But if you're ready, guys, I'm not sure who these are for, so decide who wants to take them. But the first one is, can you communicate with the inter-application bus from a browser window?
That's an interesting one. So yes and no. So not natively out of the box. However, a common approach to this is you can build custom services. So if a custom service happened to give you an API which was authenticated, then the answer is yes. And actually, that's a common approach. So what you might do is browsers can generally call APIs on localhost, which would be running locally on the machine. You could, I guess, in theory, build a local API, a local API server in Node.js or C# or whatever tech you choose as an OpenFin service, and then that OpenFin service, of course, would have access to the inter-app bus, which could communicate with other applications. I guess there's a bunch of whole security concerns around that, but these are the same security concerns that you would have with building any API. You probably want to do some sort of authentication using some sort of token authentication method or something like that. But I guess, so the simple answer is yes, Claire, or whoever answered the question. I guess the more complex answer is you may have to do a little bit of work yourself, but it's all pretty standard, the stuff you have to do.
Yeah, on a related note, I was actually talking to, this question came up just a few weeks back, and I was talking to the OpenFin team about it, and whilst they don't have out-of-the-box support for that, it's something they're looking at, and they expect to give us an update on that shortly. So I think it's a common request that they're aware of. So I think it's something they are considering in future product releases.
Yeah.
Here's another one for you both. Can I call my Java code from OpenFin if it has no user interface?
Yes, you can. Actually, there's adapters for most of the common tech, and you can actually do that. And you can spin up headless services in OpenFin, so you can actually you can distribute assets and run them on the desktop as a headless service, i.e., no user interface. And again, you can communicate with that application through the Interrupt bus. So yes, you can. I use C# because I pretty much, if you cut me through the middle, I'd say Microsoft like a stick of rock. I'm a bit of a C# guy. That's my history. I'm not a massive fan of Java, even though I've had to write Java at some point in life. But yes, you can if you want to. I think there's also legacy support for a number of other techs. I think there's an Adobe Air adapter as well, if I'm not mistaken. So there's all sorts of adapters, and they're all listed on the OpenFin website. Actually, one thing I would say is the OpenFin developer site is a very, very good resource. It's well organized and easy to read.
On that particular note, you mentioned that you're a C# guy through and through. I've actually got a question for you, Mark. We've both gone through this transition. I used to be a big C# WPF developer. You're talking about some of the technical building blocks required to connect the old world and the new world, but one of the most significant changes is a lot of people are going to have to make that transition themselves from being C# to web developers. So what advice would you give to someone who's a C# developer who's in a situation where they're going to have to start adopting web technologies?
TypeScript, in one simple word. We've actually been through this transition. I'm not going to talk too much about a project I'm currently working on, but literally a .NET C# house moving to web tech, and their developers have taken to it like ducks to water, provided we use TypeScript. In fact, sometimes it gets quite frustrating because they're actually more strict with their TypeScript rules than I generally am. So it's TypeScript, I would say. I think the other thing is there's massive amount of resources and community around the JavaScript, TypeScript community out there, and actually just learn the basics. I think around threading's a really promises and threading and because they're not the same as async await in C#, however they're similar. So it's not a massive transition.
TypeScript has made it so much easier to make that transition.
Absolutely.
I transitioned. I'm talking about technology here. I transitioned about 5 or 6 years ago when it was back in the days of things like Knockout and so on.
Yeah, jQuery was probably still a thing then as well, was it called?
Yeah.
We're speaking of resurgence. Yeah, speaking of resurgence.
Anyway, we should. Any more questions? Otherwise,
any more questions?
Well, we've got a couple of minutes to go. We've got one last question, which I think is the perfect one to end on. It's from a Mr. Scott in Newcastle, and it says, "What's it like being back in the office, Mark?"
It's nice being back in the office. I will actually explain why I'm in the office for everybody who's watching. I am staying at home as being told by the government. However, I do live in a very remote area, and doing a webinar from the house would be pretty impossible. But it's lovely being back in the office. Actually, it's just really nice to be able to sit at a desk. I love being at home with the kids, but sometimes it's nice to be in the office. I think everybody with kids probably knows what I'm saying there.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, that's us finished for today. I hope everyone's enjoyed that. And thank you to everybody for joining us, and to Mark and Colin for today's webinar. And I hope you can all join us next time. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Great. Thanks, everyone.